It's just like,
Right. And then it's
oh,
a disaster. Well, thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you. I know you said that you're it's a little bit more female dominated in general, but I think as a leader of a company, any organization, being a woman is still very special. And so I think that there's still a lot that we can learn from you. And I've also really been, I haven't gotten through all of them, but I've really been enjoying your podcast as well. So
good, good. Well,
learning
thank
learning
you.
a lot.
Good, good. And yeah, the more after I thought about it a bit, I realized there are things that I've certainly learned in my role and in interactions that I've had that maybe aren't within the media bubble, but of course anybody in this role is interacting with people in the finance world and legal and insurance, and so we do still probably run up against some of the same incidences.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got your headshot in your bio, and what I'll do is I'll record separately a little intro about you and who I'm talking to in this episode, and I'll incorporate some of that. Is there anything beyond what you had sent me that you want me to include as part of your intro at all?
um I don't think the intro mentions my book, so that would be
Yeah.
probably
Okay. All right.
in,
Let me.
in there. Yeah,
I'm
just as
gonna.
I'm the author of it.
Yes. So let me just make a note of that so I do not forget to do it. Intro include book and intro. Okay, cool. All right. I'll make sure I do that as well, which also wonderful book. Thank you for writing that.
That was a labor of love, let me tell you.
I bet. I bet it was interesting to be on a little bit on the other side of it, as you've talked about in your podcast.
100%. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I'm
yeah.
definitely way more sympathetic now, not just empathetic.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so kind to respond on Twitter. I've actually connected with a lot of my guests just on Twitter. It's kind of an interesting space to be in. And so, as you know, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and I thought of this a long time ago when I was flying and I saw a commercial pilot. And I was like, oh, she and I probably had a lot of similar experiences, even though we're in divergent fields.
Mhm.
And wouldn't it be cool to just talk to women in all different kinds of careers about their experiences and what they have to teach to, other women and to younger women who hope to be in those shoes someday. And so that was the inspiration for this. And COVID happened. All of a sudden, all my elective surgeries went away temporarily. I'm getting back to operating, which is nice. But it was just it was interesting timing because all of a sudden everybody else's schedules were kind of cleared too. Not everybody, but a lot of folks all of a sudden weren't flying. The execs weren't flying around, and so it kind of was perfect timing to get get kind of knee deep in all of my interviews. And so I'm launching in about 2 weeks.
Oh, good.
So I'm super excited.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, well, is there anything that, I try to make it as conversational as possible. And I usually will start with asking about just where you grew up, your influences growing up, role models, just kind of your path to where you are today, career wise as well, and then different challenges you experienced as a woman and throughout that. I like to talk about imposter syndrome. And then at the end, I'll ask for one single good piece of advice that you have for women who want to be leaders or step into your shoes and do something like what you do now, what that advice is. And then I'll wrap up by just asking you, where can listeners keep up with you online? You can list your website and your social media. And then as we kind of take twists and turns as we're talking, then we'll just go there. I don't mind going off on tangents, and I think that's kind of what makes the conversation fun.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, that
So,
sounds great.
all right, well, I'll go ahead and start, and I'll just welcome you.
All right.
All right. Oops, sorry. There's something funky with my screen. Okay. Let me fix that. Okay. All right. I'll pause for a second. All right, I'm so excited to have Tanya Hall on with me today of Greenleaf Book Group. Thank you, Tanya, so much for being here with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So, as you all heard in the introduction, Tanya Hall is the CEO of Greenleaf Book Group. And I wanted to talk to her because she is a female leader of a corporation and she is an influencer and she is obviously responsible for helping people get their important stories out to the world. And Tanya, I want to ask you a little bit, and we're going to go way back. Tell me a little bit about what your childhood and upbringing was like, and how it shaped you into who you are today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just had this conversation with a friend the other evening. I'm one of three kids. I'm the middle kid. So that'll tell you something right there. But I have a brother and a sister. And my sister and I have both been called bulldogs. And what's interesting is that I think both of us are very independent people. And we very much rebelled against the way, I won't say the way my dad treated my mother, but the dynamics in their relationship, because I grew up in Southern California, but my parents were from the Midwest. My mother didn't work, and my dad was a VP in an aerospace company and a very stressful job. So she definitely served him. That was her, not that it's a bad thing, but that was her role in life, was to serve him. But there were things that she did that I would look at and say, geez, what about your own identity? And for example, she wore her hair in this beehive. And as a kid, of course, I was teased about it. And everyone talked about my mom being Marge Simpson. And I asked her, Mom, it's so much work. She would go to the beauty parlor at 5 a.m. every Friday, and this thing would
Wow.
blow up. And every night she'd have to put a net around it and spray it. It's like, what? But she had beautiful, long black hair. And I said, Mom, why don't you just do something different with your hair? It's been like that for 20 years. And she said, this is how your father likes it. And I remember like really just
Oh,
being kind of appalled by that. And it's like, what about you though? Are you really happy like
yeah.
that? And there are little instances like that throughout my childhood, of course, seeing just the nature of that dynamic and not thinking that would be healthy for me. I think that's part of how I became who I am. And just, I'm not going to allow myself to live by somebody else's standards.
Hmm.
And interestingly, my sister and I both sort of pushed back against what we saw as children and became, in both of our cases, we support our family. So here we are.
Yeah, a role reversal, right? Compared to what you grew up with. And who were your role models and who were your inspirations growing up?
I've thought a lot about that. I wish I could say that I had a female mentor, and I wish I did have a female mentor. I think I saw things in a lot of strong women that if I could combine them all into one amazing woman, she would be my mentor. But especially once I got into the television business, and that's where I started my career. I was a film major. I interned for the TV show Extra. It's still on the air,
Uh-huh.
unbelievably. And
Yeah.
um, I met a lot of women there who were very career driven, very ambitious. I'm a very hardworking person. And I saw myself in all of those women,
Mhm.
and they were succeeding. They were the producers on the show. We had a female lawyer who was a hotshot lawyer for Warner Brothers at the time. And so these women were, taking no prisoners and just out there working their butts off, but being recognized for it as well. And
Mhm.
I think I was very much inspired by that because they were also happy and they were working alongside men. And again, in a lot of the media world, there's not an imbalance in terms of gender at that level. So
Mhm.
that, kind of down in the front lines and in the producer work that we did at the time. And I think I also saw there that, especially in that field, women, I have run the risk of painting with broad brushstrokes here, but women are often better storytellers because women connect emotion to events, and that's the heart of a
Mhm.
story. So I think in watching a producer do his or her work, the women's pieces were just more compelling. And it's because they brought in that emotional element. And that's part of what got me to start to realize that being a female, I have different strengths, not less than
Mhm.
or greater than, they're different. And part of succeeding is figuring out how to bring that forward in what I do, because that's how I'm going to stand apart from my male colleagues.
Right. And it sounds like in that experience, like you were saying, you were surrounded by a lot of really amazing and powerful and successful women. One of the things that I had noticed when I was going through training, and there are more women in orthopedics now than there ever were in training, but you don't always encounter other women who are immediately your advocates.
Hmm.
And it's kind of this weird phenomenon where you think, "Oh, here's another woman. There aren't a lot of us, and, maybe she'll get my back," and that's not always the case, and it was very shocking the first time I experienced that. Did you encounter that? And what do you think is behind that? Do you think it's defensiveness or protecting one's position?
I thought a lot about that as well because, yes, I also encountered that and was surprised by it, like you. I think part of what might be behind it, who knows the real truth of it unless you get in some cognitive psychology. But I think there are a lot of stories that we just sort of absorb as women moving through the world, right? I've thought a lot. I'm 46 and I'm still reconciling, like, at what point in my life did I accept the story that I'm less valuable than a
Mhm,
man? Because at some
mhm,
point I did, and it's a script that gets programmed into your head, and you start to live your life in a certain way, and then
mhm,
you actively have to unwrite it at some point when you realize it's not even true. Like, what have I been doing my whole life? So I think part of it, especially I was in my 20s when I worked in television, and I had not started that unwinding process. And so I think all of the women in that particular setting were under the impression that there wasn't enough room for all of us,
mm,
right? Because we
yeah,
had to fight this hard to get where we are. That would tell us that there's
right,
not enough room, maybe, for all of us to be here. And so I'm not going to help you.
yeah,
That's my take on it. I don't have the real answer. I think it's fascinating because I am the mother of two daughters as well. And my oldest daughter is studying physics, and she tells me these stories. Like, she'll work on this homework that I will never understand. She'll tell me, like, she's a lovely girl, and she wears these, fake eyelashes that make her look like Daisy Duck. And I think it's unexpected when you see her working on her physics homework. And she said people will make
Yeah,
the strangest comments to her about if she's really doing the work. And it breaks my heart. It's, man, how can I help her go through this reconciliation now versus
right.
waiting as long as I did to try to sort out these stories that I need to deprogram?
Yeah, and I think part of the reason behind this podcast is to maybe put some of those stories, our stories out there so that the younger women who are just about to pick their careers hear that there are other ways to deal with that. There are ways to kind of have a thick skin but still have emotion and still connect with the good feminine parts that we have
Hmm.
and navigate our way through the world and not have to shed whatever pieces of femininity we want to have and that are a part of us and still kind of be ass kickers, right?
Yeah, yeah, it shouldn't be either or.
Yeah, exactly. How did you pivot from television into book publishing?
Yeah, most people go the other way, interestingly. So I decided when my girls were young, I did not want to raise them in Los Angeles, and for various reasons. And so a friend of mine had moved to Austin, just outside of Austin, actually, and was singing the praises of Austin, Texas. And this was back in like 2004. And like every Californian, I was like, no way, Texas. Stars and bars and people driving pickup trucks with two teeth. No. And then I came out to visit Austin, and Austin is just, they jokingly call it the blueberry and the cherry pie of Texas. It's a college.
Yeah.
It's really grown tremendously in
Mhm.
the gosh, what has it been, 16 years since I've been here. So I realized what a actually great place Austin would be to raise children, because Austin also has a culture of, our slogan is keep Austin weird. So, it's a very diverse and accepting culture versus kind of
Yeah.
whitewashed culture you have in parts of Los Angeles. So
Yeah. This
I
is
decided,
Austin is kind of I don't know if we call it a sister city, but like a cousin to Portland, right? Because Portland
right.
also has the Keep Portland Weird slogan thing going on, and I think that when I visited Austin, a lot of very similar things to what I see here in Portland.
Yes, I think Portland is our sister city, actually.
And are we actually sisters? Oh, great! Super.
But
That's
yes,
even better than cousins.
they are very similar, and Austin's a great
Yeah.
town. We have some traffic problems, but yeah, I decided I was going to move to Austin, and so I did it a little bit backwards. I picked the place and then realized I had to find a job, and I found this job at Greenleaf Book Group, which was 4 people at the time, and
Oh,
that
wow.
yeah, it was very much a startup, and that job was distribution manager, which
Mhm.
I understood to be working with the authors. And at that time, it was really just listing the books in a bunch of databases. I have learned over the years that I'm really good at building things, and so I took the job didn't pay much at the time. I took it just to have something, and I told myself I'll find something better, that pays me what I'm worth when we get settled here. And I just fell in love with the work. I fell in love with working with authors and how passionate they were about sharing
Mhm.
something in the world. The impact that I can have by being a part of making that happen gave me this great
Mhm.
sense of purpose. And then I fell in love with building it. And so then it fell onto my shoulders to open up the relationships with the retail channels that we now sell to: libraries, wholesalers, airport accounts, international distribution, the digital imprint that we have. I launched later when ebooks became a thing. We now have an audience building and platform development group that I've also launched. So I love launching and building, and obviously that's how I've landed in the CEO chair.
Yeah. And so, and I would love to ask you to share a little bit about what makes Greenleaf special and a little different. In talking to other physicians, there are a lot of doctors who want to write books, and there is talk about the different kinds of publishing. And I know that like your entire podcast goes really deep into all of this, but if you could give the listeners kind of an overview of what type of publishing you guys do compared to maybe what your average person is used to as a layperson, and just kind of give us a quick lay of the land.
Yeah, sure. So we are a hybrid publisher. And what that means is we sit in between self publishing and traditional publishing. So the way I explain it to people who know a little bit about the business is on the self publishing side, you have the benefits are a faster speed to market. Obviously, you have control of your content because you're taking care of all of it. You have a higher percentage of royalties because you're the one investing in the production of the books. And for business people, I make the comparison of bootstrapping versus venture capital, right? So
Mm,
if you're bootstrapping, typically you're going to see greater rewards on the back end because you shouldered the risk on the front end. But you're
mm-hmm,
also shouldering some risk on the front end. So there's that to weigh in your decision. From the traditional side, the benefits we bring are definitely distribution because that's the hub of the wheel here, as I was just
mm-hmm,
talking about. And really, that's where the rubber meets the road anyway. Also, our processes internally are very much like a traditional publisher in terms of the departments that we have, the way a project moves through the publishing process. In fact, a lot of our staff comes out of traditional publishing houses. They decided to flee New York.
right.
Come to Austin. You'd be surprised at how many of those I have. Um, and then, of course, the clout that comes with a brand name because we've been doing this for
Mm-hmm,
23 years now, and people know who we are and the quality that we stand for. So, really, this model brings the benefits of both self publishing and traditional publishing and eliminates some of the downfalls on each side because self publishers have issues with distribution. It's really hard to get your book into a bookstore when you're self published. It's also a
mm-hmm,
lot of work. And then on the traditional side, a lot of my authors are thought leaders or experts, and there's a lot of importance for them to hold on to some of the intellectual property rights around their work so that they
mm-hmm.
can best monetize that content,
Yeah.
which I write about extensively in my book. And in a traditional model, that can start to slip away from you, and or you just lose some control over your project because you're not paying for it. So we sit in the middle there, and it's a good model for people who are thought leaders or otherwise need to monetize their intellectual property.
Okay. And you mentioned your book. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, and my book
Yeah.
is called Ideas, Influence, and Income. and I resisted writing it for the longest time. That framework is one that I've been using with authors for years to walk them through how we're going to get the most out of the hard work that is writing a book, because it is not easy. And you ultimately want to make sure that if putting it into, as I call, different containers is a priority for you. So if you want to do
Mhm.
speaking and online learning and mastermind groups and workbooks and all the different ways you can monetize this content, you have to be strategic on the front end, and you can make all of that happen in an organized way where you don't have your head blow up from all of the deadlines and responsibilities.
Mhm.
So my staff kept pushing me, well, why don't you write a book about everything that you're teaching authors? And the answer in my head, of course, was because I know how hard it is, because I watch authors struggle with this every day. And
Right.
at some point, I realized what a hypocrite I was being by telling people, hey, you should plant your flag as a thought leader by writing a book. And I hadn't done so myself. So I decided to walk my talk, and I sat down and wrote the book. And it took me a little over a year.
Mhm.
Uh, and I learned a lot. I definitely became much more sympathetic to my authors who get stuck in the writing process.
Yeah.
And I've done some follow up after writing it to tell people what I learned in that process and what mistakes I would not make again. So hopefully it makes somebody else's journey a little easier.
Yeah, and throughout this process, or even just your career in rising to the CEO position, had you ever had a moment where you were like, "Oh crap, what am I doing here?" Or "Oh crap, I don't know what I'm doing." Like that whole imposter syndrome thing, has that happened to you?
100%.
Does it still happen to you?
It does. It does. And I think when I first took the CEO chair, I mean, that was 6 years ago now. I remember literally taking the seat at the head of the table for our first managers meeting and feeling like, this is not my seat. It felt very strange, like physically, and also just sort of in my spiritual, like where my head was. And so it took me a little while to settle into who I was as a CEO, because our founder sold the company, and then that's when I came in as
Mhm.
CEO, and I'm very different than him. And we worked well as a team together because we were each other's foils. And I thought that that would be a weakness for me coming into this seat, because I thought, well, people are expecting, he's a bit of a showman, and
Mhm.
I'm more of a listener. And as I said, I love to build, and I'm always looking for patterns. So a lot of what I do is almost on the quiet side, as I observe and then find an
Mhm.
opportunity. And in my head, that was a weakness. I thought, well, that I'm not giving them the energetic, run around the stage and whoop, whoop, you get your staff excited kind of energy. And it wasn't until I met more and more CEOs that I realized, like, okay, there's all kinds of CEOs. There are
Mhm.
people who are the whoop whoop, I'm going to get you excited CEOs, and then there are the financial minded CEOs, and then there are the marketing minded CEOs, and then the turnaround CEOs.
Mhm.
And so I settled into a level of comfort in who I was, and more importantly, why I was tapped on the shoulder. Other people
Mhm.
believed in me,
Mhm.
and so then it became a call to serve them. And
Right.
once I got out of my own head and made it about performing for someone else who believed in me, everything became much easier.
And so as a woman leader and coming into this position where personality wise, style wise, you're different than your predecessor, do you think that there was a cultural shift or were there people that you had to convince? Now, of course, you came from internally, so you're not an outsider, but was that something you had to deal with?
Definitely. And there were people who, let's see, pretty much everybody came around. Some people did leave,
Mhm.
and that hurt. I took it personally at first, and then I realized it wasn't going to be for the best in the long run, regardless. And I've become very good, I think, at raising the bar internally with hiring. So my team is
Mhm.
amazing. There's not a single person on this team that I don't want here, or they wouldn't be here. But yeah, that was definitely an emotional struggle, because there were people who I had once worked under, who now I was the boss. And I think that was
Mhm.
difficult for them. It was
Yeah.
a matter of earning their respect, though, through results. And our
Mhm.
results since I took over have been increasing every single year. I've by far surpassed my predecessors' results. So I'm proud of that.
That's awesome. And what do you think what do you think will be your 5 and 10 and 20-year, what are your big goals on the horizon?
I think some of those are falling in my lap, I'm happy to say, and that's again something I have to remind myself of when I get those doses of imposter syndrome. If people
Mhm.
are coming to you, Tanya, so
Mhm.
they know there's something you have to give to them. I've been really interested in trying to give back to other business leaders, and especially I love the publishing community, and I've been wanting to get involved with more boards, and that
Uh-huh.
opportunity fell into my lap. um, I'm very happy to report. So I'm super excited about doing more of that and just being able to contribute with this, this little world of knowledge, very specific to one business, but also relevant to the larger media landscape. When I take a
Mhm.
step back and look at some of the commonalities that are the same in all areas of the media business. So that's something that I'm really excited about. I think I love what I do. I don't have any plans to leave this company anytime soon, but if that were not my choice at some point, I think that from here, I would love to build my own thing and start my own business
Mhm.
and see how I do at that. I think that's very exciting. And as I said before, that's what really energizes me. So I think I could do it well.
Have you ever had a moment where, well, have you ever had any experiences where you had something that you had high hopes for and it ended up being this big fail or big disaster? And then more importantly, how did you get yourself back up from that?
Yeah, that's interesting because you always hear people say, fail fast. And then you hear other people say, well, don't give up. Like keep pushing. And so where's the middle ground when you
Yeah.
something is not working? I have an initiative like that right now that I've been trying to get. This is the second time I've tried to get it off the ground. And so I'll tell you about it. In this company, we do so much work helping authors brand themselves and really define who their audience is, start building that audience to be there for the launch of the book so that it's successful.
Mhm.
And that's something that's important to any author. And so I had the idea to offer that type of work for authors being published by other publishers.
Mhm.
And the first time because you can find those services through lots of different random people, but there's not very
Yeah.
many turnkey solutions for that under
Mhm.
one roof. So the first time I launched it, I could not get my staff behind it at the time because they couldn't understand why any other publisher would let us, a competing
Uh-huh.
publisher, work with their authors, and frankly they were probably right. So we tried a little rebranding thing. We let it sleep for a few years. I dug it up again because I got excited about it and branded it in a totally different way. And then we launched that in the middle of a pandemic. So
I think the
we
pandemic
are.
kind of really changed a lot of plans for a lot of people.
Yeah. So, my staff has been really great about coming to me to saying, we feel like we've disappointed you because we're not putting numbers on the board with this initiative. And I've told them, like, I'm disappointed. Like, the buck stops with me and I'm the one who's directing how we take this to market. And I could have said, let's not do it or pull the plug on it right now because there's a lot going on in the world. But I believe in it and I believe that it's still a service people need. And perhaps right now people are at home not working and they have time to put energy towards these types of initiatives. So let's try
Right.
that angle. And it's all about iterating, and we'll iterate until we think we've exhausted all of reasonable ideas, and then perhaps we'll put it to bed again. But I
Yeah.
really believe it has a chance to succeed.
Fingers crossed. So we were talking beforehand, and you mentioned that you've got 3 big dogs at home, but you've also raised 2 daughters, and, it sounds like they are college, high school at this
Uh,
point?
One is a sophomore at the University of Oregon studying physics. Very proud of her.
Ah,
Yeah,
down
she's
the
a
down
smart
the way
kid.
from me, yeah.
Yeah. And my youngest she's just graduated high school, and that was certainly a weird thing. And in a
Oh, yeah.
graduated on Zoom, and she's my animator. So she's headed off to
Oh, cool.
a college of art and design out in California.
That's awesome. How did you balance and we always talk about balance, right? And it's more like juggling rather than balancing, I think. But how did you manage that as a leader of your company and as a mom? And what's your what's your take on that? And what's your advice on that?
Well, and I'll throw one more wrinkle into that. I'm not a single mom anymore, but I was a single mom for most of those years. So
Oh, wow.
that certainly added some stress to it. But yeah, I don't believe in balance. I talk a lot about flow, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been very forgiving with myself and my energy because I know my own levels throughout the day, to the point where there's a reason I'm doing this interview in the afternoon. I'm verbal in the afternoon. I am not verbal in the morning. In the morning, I'm thinking, analyzing, and listening, and I often do my writing in the morning.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's just my own personal biorhythms, and I've come to learn those, and I work around them. And that helps me to manage not only the things I have to accomplish in the day, but how I feel, how much I can focus. So that was a big thing, actually, to recognize that and accept it and not fight it, but work with it. And in general, I guess I'm blessed that the type of work I do, people have slapped me on the wrist before to say you really shouldn't be working in the evening hours the way you do, and I didn't understand that for the longest time. And they said, well, what happens is you send an email at 8 o'clock at night, and then the employee receiving it feels guilty that they didn't get back to you at 8:30. And I didn't realize that they were having that impression. And so I've made it very clear to people. Now I don't even send those emails at 8. I save them and I
Mm-hmm.
send them during business hours. But that is just how my energy flows. And so if I get inspired or I realize at 8 o'clock I've got this great idea, I'm just going to start working on it, and I don't confine it to business hours. And my kids know that, and I think they've accepted it because they know my
Mm-hmm.
work makes me happy. So I'm never
Mm-hmm.
grumbling about, I've got to do this thing and it's 8 o'clock at night. It's more that, oh, I had this great idea and I got to go write it down and do some work on it right now before it leaves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and by and large, my girls have just been so supportive, and we're a tight knit little group. And I think they're as proud of me as I am of them.
And so if, and maybe this is like something you would have said to your girls, or just something you maybe would say to a mentee, someone who looks up to you. What's that one big piece of advice that you would give in helping a young woman find themselves, find their career, chase their passions, and not be worried about what everybody thinks?
Well, I think you just said it. You just nailed it. Worried about everybody thinks, and that's easier said than done, right? Because
Yeah.
we're programmed to be, and it's part of it is just our human nature. But also, as women, we're told from such an early age what it means to look like a woman, to behave like a woman, to have a career like a woman. And so,
Hmm.
you have to really be so true to yourself in ways that I think are hard when you're younger, for some people. And I think a lot of us
Hmm.
can grow into it later, and that's fine too. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned along those lines, and it ties into the imposter syndrome thing a bit. When you're having these feelings of self-doubt or anxiety or I don't belong or I'm not enough, those can live alongside your ability to do the thing, right? So it's
Hmm.
kind of like public speaking. And I learned early, and I do a fair share of public speaking. I, of course, would get the butterflies before I would go out and speak to a group. And I hated it because then I would be obsessed about, oh, I'm such a terrible speaker. I'm a weakling because I have butterflies right now. And another professional speaker I spoke with, I'm not a professional speaker, but a professional speaker I spoke with said, every speaker gets butterflies. Everybody does. And it's because you care. And it's your body giving you energy to do
Hmm.
the task at hand. And I loved that because it put me in power of this feeling that otherwise had me feeling weak and helpless. I was like, this is a
Right.
gift from my body, and I'm going to channel it and give it back to this crowd. And the same thing is true now if I'm in a room and I feel that, oh, I don't think I belong here, or somebody's doubting me, or gosh, I think they think I'm stupid. Then those are energy, those thoughts are energy, and my body is giving them up, and I'm going to grab them and turn them around and prove them wrong. And so it's really just sometimes getting control of your mind.
I love that. I love the idea of kind of reharnessing all those fearful emotions and taking them and making them, turning them around and making them work for you. That's
Absolutely.
really a great piece of advice. So, if our listeners want to keep up with you and what you're doing online, or maybe the things that your company are doing, where can they find you?
Sure. So on Twitter, I'm at Tanya Hall, TanyAHall. The company website is greenleafbookgroup.com. My book website is ideasinfluenceandincome.com. Those are probably the main ways.
And your podcast, tell us where to
Oh, of
find your
course.
podcast.
Yes, my podcast. Now you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts, which is probably iTunes, but it is called Published. And just as it sounds, it is everything about writing a book, producing a book, marketing a book, launching a book, creating a brand, monetizing. So it's a good resource, I hope, for people who are either thinking about writing a book. And depending on which episode you jump into, if you've already written a book and you need help with a certain aspect of the process, there's probably a podcast there for you.
Awesome, Tanya. Thank you so much for being on today and sharing with us your wisdom and your experiences.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. That's a wrap.
Yay.
That was fun. Thank you so much.
Fun. Yeah,
I
thank you for the
really enjoyed
opportunity.
that. Yeah, I will I'll let you know. I'll just keep you posted by email. I'll send something out to everybody just to confirm the launch date. It's tentatively June 15th, and as long as I have all these different pieces that I'm trying that are hopefully going to all come together, because I rebranded my website and like my developers in India, and I'm like, we need to get this website up before the launch. And so a lot of
Yes.
moving pieces, and hopefully that's there, and then the episodes are ready for launch, and then probably yours will probably be in a couple of weeks, because I kind of like recorded a whole bunch as I was not working, and so I have everything kind of lined up. But I was so excited to include you in this, and I'm sure I'm going to be reaching out to you and or some of your colleagues for future book ideas. This
Good.
getting into this podcast has really made me think about how cool it would be to kind of expand this into something in that format, as an extension. And I know you talk on your podcast about how launching a podcast would help your book. I was like, wait, I don't know. I have a podcast, but I don't have a book. This is totally backwards. But
But doing the podcast is going to help you develop your content.
yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It looks like it's nice and sunny. You should go enjoy your afternoon. And yeah, it was very nice to meet you. And I look forward to staying in touch, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you again. It was an honor to be a part of it, and happy to promote it when the time is right.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye bye.